It was 2.5 years ago that someone very important to me said that I need to start taking ownership over my life. And I remember being in that conversation and feeling convicted, maybe a little bit offended, but also a little bit in awe and wonder because I needed someone to say that to me. There were a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish, or I felt like God was leading me towards, or that I felt like I could have my hand in, just at least a little bit. But I could never do that if I didn't first start taking ownership over my life, over my actions, over who I was and who I was becoming. And 2.5 years later, I can still confidently say that I'm grateful for that conversation. I was listening to a sermon this morning talking about how in Ecclesiastes, the writer Solomon says that there's nothing new under the sun. But then in all other scriptures and different passages we find in the Bible, we see that God is doing a new thing. I mean, yeah, what a new thing. For him to give his one and only son, for him to come in flesh and die for our sins and live again, what a new thing. So I guess who are we to think that God is stagnant? Who are we to think that God is trying to just keep us in the same place and keep us in a word that happened 2.5 years ago? Now, don't get me wrong. I still believe that I should be taking ownership over my life, but not the life that I had 2.5 years ago. So I beg you to see where I'm trying to get with this. And it's just kind of this refreshing and renewal of the idea that I can still take ownership of my life, but it looks a little bit different now. Because who I was 2.5 years ago, the 18-year-old version of myself, is not who I am today. She's grown and she's evolved and she's changed. And I would confidently say the same thing for you as well, wherever you're listening from or whatever your method is of tuning in. God is doing a new thing. I think we can hold closely, but we can hold loosely to the things that God has said. And by that, I mean we should really take into account the things that God is speaking over our lives, but we should also be completely attuned to what he's trying to speak to us now, because it could sound the same, but it could mean something totally different. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, as a young adult, and maybe you are too, maybe you're someone who's a little bit behind me in life, or maybe you're someone who's a little bit in front of me in life, as someone who's 21 years old and is figuring out a lot of different things, relationships, career-wise, school, family, even just my interpersonal spirit and soul. I'm growing up, but I'm also grown up in a way. And there's a tension to that. But here I am again. And I guess I'm just saying I'm glad to live in that tension. And I'm glad to learn. And I'm glad that God doesn't change, but he's constantly doing something new.